The rain fell hard through the jungle canopy, turning the narrow trail into thick mud as Japanese soldiers moved quietly between the trees, confident that the Americans ahead were weak, tired, and badly led. They'd been right before. Tonight felt the same. Then the shooting started, sharp and close, and men began dropping in the dark. 6 days later, 87 of them would be dead. And the man responsible wasn't a seasoned officer or a battle-hardened veteran. He was a skinny American kid who'd been told, more than once, that he was too young to fight. In early 1943, the war in the Pacific had turned brutal and personal, and the Japanese believed they still held the edge in jungle combat because they trained for this kind of fighting their entire lives. They moved fast, struck at night, and vanished before sunrise, leaving American units shaken and angry. The jungle wasn't just terrain to them, it was home field advantage. They knew how to use every shadow, every sound, every moment of darkness to their benefit. Most US soldiers were older, larger, and slower, trained in conventional warfare on open battlefields, not in the suffocating heat and endless vegetation of the South Pacific. Japanese officers thought they understood them well, had studied their tactics, and knew their weaknesses. What they didn't understand was the teenager hiding in the mud with a rifle and a calm mind. Quick thing before we continue, hit subscribe if you want more incredible World War II stories like this, because we tell the most intense moments of the war every single week, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. His name barely appeared in newspapers during the war, and when officers first saw his enlistment papers, they laughed. He looked 16, maybe younger, with a baby face that made him seem more suited for a classroom than a battlefield. And they told him to go home because boys didn't survive in places like New Guinea and the Philippines. The Pacific Theater was where experienced men went to die. What chance did a kid have? But he didn't leave. He stayed quiet, learned fast, and listened more than he spoke. While other soldiers boasted or complained, he observed. He watched how the veterans moved, how they held their weapons, how they read the jungle. He absorbed everything like a sponge, turning every drill, every patrol, every warning into knowledge he could use. And when the shooting started, he moved like he'd been born for it. The mission was supposed to be simple. A small American unit needed to hold a jungle corridor that Japanese forces used to move supplies at night, so they could protect a larger force building defenses nearby. Intelligence suggested light enemy activity, maybe a few patrols, nothing a well-positioned squad couldn't handle. The plan depended on speed, silence, and surprise, but almost immediately everything went wrong when Japanese scouts spotted movement and called in a counterattack that turned the trail into a killing ground. Gunfire erupted from both sides, tracers cutting through leaves and branches like deadly fireflies, and the Americans pulled back in confusion as flares lit the sky, turning night into a nightmarish orange glow. Men shouted orders, then screams, then nothing but gunfire and rain. The carefully planned ambush had become chaos, with soldiers scattered, some wounded, others simply lost in the darkness. In the chaos, the young soldier found himself separated from his unit, alone, soaked, and surrounded by enemy movement on all sides. He could hear Japanese voices in every direction, calm and methodical, searching, hunting. This was the moment most men froze. Instead, he went still. He pressed his body into the mud, feeling the cold water seep through his uniform, slowed his breathing until it was barely perceptible, and listened as Japanese soldiers passed within feet of him, speaking softly, confident they'd already broken the American line. He could smell the oil on their weapons, hear the rustle of their gear. When the first one turned his back, the kid raised his rifle and fired once, clean and quiet. Then another. Then another. He didn't rush. He didn't panic. He waited. Over the next hours, he moved like a shadow, crawling through undergrowth so thick it tore at his skin, waiting in positions for what felt like eternities, firing only when he was sure of his target and his escape route. When dawn came, several Japanese soldiers lay dead along the trail, and the young American slipped away without being seen, rejoining his unit as if nothing had happened. His uniform was shredded, his hands were bleeding, but his eyes were clear. That should have been the end of it. But the Japanese didn't stop coming. Over the next 6 days, the same trail became a battlefield again and again as Japanese forces tried to break through, convinced they faced a large, well-dug-in American unit with machine gun nests and heavy support. In reality, they were fighting a handful of exhausted soldiers and one teenager who refused to give ground. Each night followed the same pattern. Japanese troops moved in carefully, spreading out, searching for weak points, probing the darkness with cautious patrols, and each night, shots rang out from impossible angles as men fell without ever seeing who fired. Panic spread quietly at first, whispers among the ranks, then openly, as patrols failed to return and officers argued about how many Americans were really out there. Some claimed they faced a full company. Others insisted snipers were hidden in the trees. The kid kept count, not with pride, but with focus, marking positions in his mind, remembering faces, adjusting his shots based on how the enemy adapted. He used captured weapons when his ammo ran low, switched firing spots constantly, never shooting from the same location twice, and learned the sound of Japanese movement so well that he could tell when an attack was coming minutes before it happened. Every click of metal, every hushed command, every footfall became part of a language he understood perfectly. One night, they charged. Dozens of Japanese soldiers rushed the trail together, yelling and firing wildly, convinced they could overwhelm whatever stood in their way through sheer force and determination. The young American waited until they were close enough to see their faces in the muzzle flashes, then opened fire, moving as he shot, rolling to new positions, never staying in one place long enough to be pinned down. Bodies fell. Screams echoed. The charge collapsed into confusion and retreat as soldiers stumbled over their own dead in the darkness. By the sixth day, Japanese commanders ordered the corridor avoided entirely. Too many men were dying, casualty reports were devastating, and no one could explain how. The psychological impact was worse than the tactical loss. An entire enemy force had been neutralized by ghosts. When American officers finally realized what had happened, they were stunned. Patrol reports listed 87 confirmed enemy dead in less than a week, all in the same narrow stretch of jungle, and most credited to a single rifleman who hadn't even been old enough to vote back home. The kid didn't brag. He didn't celebrate. He slept. Word spread through the unit, and the same officers who once told him to go home now watched him with a mix of respect and disbelief. He'd proven something they hadn't expected, not just about skill or courage, but about mindset. He didn't fight like a hero from a movie. He fought like someone who understood that survival came from patience, awareness, and refusing to waste a single movement. Years later, when veterans talked about the Pacific War, they spoke of heat, fear, and nights that never seemed to end. But they also spoke of moments when one person changed everything by simply refusing to quit. This was one of those moments. The war moved on, battles grew larger, and history focused on generals and landings and famous names. But somewhere in the jungle, a teenage soldier held a line that shouldn't have held and forced an enemy to retreat without ever knowing who had beaten them. He survived the war, grew older, and lived quietly, rarely speaking about those 6 days. Because to him, it wasn't about numbers or glory. It was about doing what needed to be done when no one else could. By the end of the Pacific War, thousands of stories like his were buried under bigger headlines. But this one mattered, because it showed how war doesn't always turn on grand plans or powerful weapons. Sometimes, it turns on a single decision made in the dark by someone everyone else underestimated. They said he was too young to fight. They were wrong. Thanks for watching. Quick disclaimer. This story is for entertainment purposes only, accuracy not verified, do your own research. If you want more true World War II stories like this, subscribe now. Next time, we're diving into another moment where luck met courage and improvisation changed everything.